The entire world is warming up due to global warming. The countries that already have developed and advanced economies are now extremely concerned, not about the pollution at the least, but about how they can shove their share of green energy goals on developing economies. Talk about changing the rules of the game for personal victories. The mighty countries have had their industrial revolution back in the 1700s and 1800s and have used up cheap fossil fuels like coal without any restrictions. When the time is here for the developing countries to step up and shine, these developed countries are trying to shut them up, citing climate change. Not only is it unfair, but it is also hypocritical, as per capita emission of Western countries is still miles and miles ahead of a developing country like India. So you will expect that PM Modi will take these hypocritical Western nations to the cleaners, and he has done exactly that in a brutal way. Hi and welcome, you are watching TFI English, the national socio-political analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I'm your host Tribhuvan, and in this video I will tell you how Western nations harassed India over climate change and how PM Modi's bold demand has shut them down. Let's begin. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is gearing up to attend two upcoming global summits back-to-back in person. He will first leave for Rome on October 29 for the G20 summit, followed by the United Nations Climate Change Conference, also called COP26 in Glasgow, UK. With the climate change being the main agenda of the summits, especially the latter, India has put forth a bold demand before PM Modi's departure, which is expected to give a tough time to Western nations to ponder about the repercussions of their actions. Reportedly, the Environment Ministry has asked compensation for the losses caused by climate disasters. Rameshwar Prasad Gupta, the ministry's senior-most civil servant, said, "Our ask is this. There should be a compensation for expenses incurred and it should be borne by developed nations." He also added that India stands with other low-income and developing countries on the matter. A conversation regarding compensation for climate disaster is expected to be a major talking point at the upcoming meet, as PM Modi is expected to lead from the front and address the pointing issue. According to an ET report, the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement included a speech to address loss and damage for causing environmental damage. The crux of the idea is that based on historical contribution to global greenhouse gases, countries will provide compensation for the damages that pollution will one day cause. However, because the developed nations have historically been the major emitters of greenhouse gases, the issue to fix the liability was never fleshed out, and thus it remained a grey area. India is looking to address this particular issue. The COP26 is the 26th conference on climate change by the United Nations. It is scheduled to be held in the city of Glasgow, Scotland, between 31st October and 12th November 2021, under the co-presidency of the United Kingdom and Italy. The conference will play host to PM Modi, United States President Joe Biden, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, French President Emmanuel Macron, among others. A 14 to 15 members delegation, including officials from Ministers of Power, Finance, Earth Sciences, Agriculture, New and Renewable Energy, Environment, Water, will represent India at COP26, with Joint Secretary Richa Sharma being India's lead negotiator. As reported previously by TFI, according to Niti Aayog's CEO Amitabh Kant, India is the only G20 nation well on track to achieve the goals mentioned under the Paris Agreement. Despite being a developing nation with a majority part of the population below the poverty line, India has managed to keep its emission in check. Under the Paris Agreement, the goal is to limit global warming to well below 2, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. And India, under PM Modi, for the first time has been ranked amongst the top 10 countries in the Climate Change Performance Index. Countries like the United States and China, which have talked much about green energy and presented policies to become carbon neutral, are lagging behind the goals set in the Paris Climate Agreement. As per the data in 2018, carbon emission data, China tops the list with 10.06 GT, the US emitted 5.41 GT, and India emitted 2.65 GT. Russia and many other countries, including Europe, that sermonizes at the top of their hoarse voices about climate change and the responsibility of people, organizations around the world have not walked the talk on Paris Climate Agreement. Argued by TFI in one of its op-ed dated March 16, the government of India, instead of being the good boy of world diplomacy, needed to stick it to the Western nations who have been the major cause of environmental degradation. For India to go around the world claiming that it is the only G20 country honoring its commitment is a bit absurd. What India should instead focus on is showing the stick to the bigger countries which emit more and have larger carbon footprints to start behaving themselves. Yet, for reasons best known to the government, the country is being projected as a lone warrior against climate change. although the same will yield no results and will impress nobody except some climate vigilantes. It is unfair to have a uniform resolution on climate change for developing as well as developed nations. While the developing countries are still in the process of achieving the full effect of their respective industrial revolutions, developed nations have burned their fair share of fossil fuel back in 1700s and 1800s during their economic revolutions. The same is yet to happen in the developing world. To uplift the countries out of poverty, they need developmental work, which comes at the cost of pollution, at least till the time sustainable practices become affordable or the developed nations pool in to make it sustainable. The so-called developed countries were supposed to provide $100 billion in climate finance to developing countries annually, starting in 2020. The money would have been used for projects that reduce emissions and help countries adapt to global warming. However, the seriousness of the rich Western nations to honor the commitment can be gauged by the fact that the current figure stands at $90 billion only, and the hopes for the full commitment are dimmed as the Glasgow conference approaches. And yet, when it comes to big international platforms, countries like India and other developing nations are hounded. The Western world wants to mask its duplicitous standard by playing the blame game and making the already poor countries feel gullible for trying to kickstart the development locomotive. India should not work alone when it comes to the battle against climate change, as that will have close to no net positive impact, but will most definitely affect countries' economy in ways not thought of by many. What India should instead focus on is making sure that the G20 countries at the very least honor their Paris Agreement commitments. That indeed will be a mark of India asserting itself as a Vishwaguru, rather than working mindlessly alone trying to combat climate change, only to hurt itself and other smaller nations. India is the only powerful country complying with the Paris Accord. Every nation is simply busy working on their economies and strengthening them, with little to no concern about the climate. Countries like Brazil, Turkey, the United States, Mexico and Saudi Arabia are the members of G20. Now India should instead focus on preaching to bigger countries which emit more and have larger carbon footprints to start behaving themselves.